Let's go on to the next neighborhood. After this huge hill, we come to a railroad crossing. All of the verbs in this neighborhood are commonly used with indirect objects such as le, but the railway divides the neighborhood into two categories. The ones on the nearer side are verbs that are used with both an indirect object and a direct object. So as examples in English, we might say, I asked him something. So that would be, to him I asked something. Here, to him is the indirect object, le, and something is the direct object, or what I asked him. In fact, the verb to ask is our first verb in this neighborhood. Preguntar is a business that serves expecting mothers. A pregnant lady comes in and asks, is the baby a boy or a girl? And the response is to paint the answer on the lady's belly. Preguntar means to ask. For example, I asked him something would be le pregunté algo. The next shop is often visited by the same women. In desear, women make wishes for their future baby. However, all of their wishes have to begin with the letter R. That's why it's desear. They might wish that he be royal, or that she should have radiance, or that he be a reincarnation, or that she have reliability. All of their wishes for their baby have to start with R. The verb desear means to wish. It's often used to wish something for someone else. So remember to use both an indirect object and a direct object. For example, I wish you the best would have you as the indirect object and the best as the direct object. Te deseo lo mejor. I wish them a very happy year would be les deseo un año muy feliz. Admittedly, these sound like things you'd read on a greeting card, not something you'd say in real life. But desear can also be used a lot like querer. I wish to do it well could be like I want to do it well. So we could say quiero hacerlo bien or deseo hacerlo bien. They wish to speak with you in a formal sense could be desean hablar contigo. Let's go back to preguntar. So again, the simple structure is le pregunto algo. I ask him something. So we have an indirect object before the verb and a named direct object after the verb. She asked them something very important would be les preguntó algo muy importante. However, very often the object after the verb is actually an entire phrase that starts with si. So we could say, he asked her something, or le preguntó algo. Or we could replace the algo with something that starts with si. He asked her if anyone knew. Le preguntó si alguien sabía. Now remember that the verb shops before and after the railroad tracks are used with indirect objects. Preguntar and desear were used with both indirect and direct objects, but the ones that we find on the other side of the railroad tracks are very strange. All of these shops are in tree houses above the ground. You can't access them directly from the road, and these verbs are associated with indirect objects, but not direct objects. This creates a strange grammatical effect, one that we very rarely have in English. And for the grammar nerds, these verbs are referred to as affectivos, or affective verbs, because they refer to how things affect someone. The first is a treehouse restaurant called Gustar. This is a 5-star restaurant, unlike Hacer, the very poorly rated restaurant near Joel's house. There's a very simple reason why Gustar is so successful. Their motto is, we aim to be pleasing. The verb gustar could literally be translated to be pleasing. But there are a couple of strange things about this word. First of all, it's always used with indirect objects. For example, it is pleasing to her is le gusta. it was pleasing to them is les gustaba. Secondly, this word is how the English word to like something is usually translated. In English, we tend to say, he likes the food, but Joel always insists that the food is the one doing the action. The food is pleasing to him, or le gusta la comida. This is a strange grammatical construction that almost never occurs in English, but there are actually several verbs that work this way, so it's really important to learn. Another of these verb shops is importar, which buys special imported goods, dips them in tar, and sells them at exorbitant prices. This store is at the top of a very high tree, making it the highest store in this neighborhood. Tar drips down onto the other shops, but they don't seem to mind. Importar is such a classy, important store that everyone is grateful to be rained on by their special tar. The word importar means to be important or to matter. For example, the food is important to her is le importa la comida. This sentence is a bit less alien to English speakers than le gusta la comida, but as you can see, the sentence structure is the same. Le importa la comida and le gusta la comida. Now let's go back to Gustar. There's actually another shop in the same tree as Gustar lower down, and this place is called Bastar. Guests who climb down from the Gustar restaurant have to go by Bastar, which sells expensive takeout boxes if they have any leftovers. The server who hands the guests these takeout boxes always asks two questions. Did you eat enough? And did that meal do the trick? The verb bastar doesn't exist in English, but it basically means to be enough or to do the trick. For example, that food was enough for her, or that food did the trick for her, is le bastó esa comida. Spanish speakers actually do use this verb quite often. A little further on, in another tree, we find a more negative shop, and this is preocupar. This is another one of the con man's golf shops, and at this one, he sells golf clubs. Anyone who enters is immediately scared into buying something. What happens is they climb up the ladder and go to the shop, but the con man quickly tells them, "You're going to fall out of the tree if you don't buy one of these golf clubs for balance." It's almost true, too, because the tree sways back and forth in the wind, nearly dumping the guests out. The customers quickly buy one of his golf clubs to keep from falling, and then the con man adds, "Good choice. That club will help you stop worrying and will help you make par on any golf course." The verb preocupar means to be worrisome. For example, the food worries her is le preocupa la comida. It's actually a bit strange that the con man has a store in this neighborhood because this is the most elite store area in Yol. But apparently the con man has swindled enough money to pay the exorbitant rent here. The owner of all this real estate in the tree houses is the Tsar, the same lazy owner of Pensar. He sits in his real estate office at the end of the neighborhood, simply watching people pass by. He tries to make sure that they all look worthy of his wealthy neighborhood, but he doesn't leave the building, and he never lets anybody in. He simply sits here in Pasar, watching people pass by, and just watching things happen in general. The word pasar, with a stress on sar, means to pass or to happen. For example, this happened to her is le pasó esto. Let's practice a few sentence examples that use various verbs from this neighborhood. I really like being here. This would be phrased as, to me it is pleasing a lot to be here, or me gusta mucho estar aquí. It's very important to her to be here. Le importa mucho estar aquí. It worries me a lot to be here. Me preocupa mucho estar aquí. Being here is enough for them. That would be les basta estar aquí. Now let's recall something that we learned back in Lesson 7. When we have indirect objects, such as those that we use at the beginning of these sentences, like le, to him, we often mention the object twice, once as a pronoun, such as le, and once again to be more specific. For example, I gave my car to the girl could be le di mi auto a la muchacha. This is literally to her, I gave my car to the girl. This is still true when we're using these affective verbs from this neighborhood. For example, the girl liked the car, or the car was pleasing to the girl, is el auto le gustaba a la muchacha. In this case, el auto is the subject, but la muchacha is the one being pleased, so to speak. In general, when you use gustar or any other verb from this neighborhood, you're very likely to use the redundant indirect object, especially if a third person, such as le, is involved, rather than me or te. Here's another example. The boy liked the food. So we could say, to the boy, to him it was pleasing, the food. Al niño le gustaba la comida. That's actually quite common as a structure using gustar. Al niño le gustaba la comida. Now let's talk about pasar. The verb pasar actually means several things related to passing or happening. It can work as an affective verb just like gustar. So compare these two sentences. Something was pleasing to him and something happened to him. So something was pleasing to him would be le gustó algo, and something happened to him would be le pasó algo. But the verb pasar can also simply mean pass, as in pass me the food. In these cases, it works very much like preguntar or desear. He asked her something would be le preguntó algo, and he passed her something would be le pasó algo. In other cases, pasar is used to mean something happened, but without an indirect object. Idiomatically, this is often used to indicate that nothing is wrong. For example, if someone makes a mistake and says, "I'm sorry," you can respond, "Oh, it's totally fine, nothing really happened." The phrase, "no pasa nada," is often used to indicate that nothing is wrong. So to say, "It's totally fine," you can say, "no pasa nada." Now, pasar often has to do with the passing of time, or tiempo. The tsar is often curiously interested in how people pass that time. Are they passing it well, or are they passing it badly? So there's an idiom, pasarlo bien, literally to pass it well. This is used to mean having a good time. For example, we had a good time could be lo pasamos bien. If you want to ask somebody, did you have a good time? You can say, lo pasaste bien? Let's go back to gustar. In English, we sometimes say, I would like you to do this, or I'd like it if you would do this. In Spanish, this would simply be, I would like it that you do this, phrased as, me gustaría que hagas esto. So that uses a subjunctive after the que. I would like you to listen to me would be, me gustaría que me escuches. Now let's go over to the con man's swaying golf shop, preocupar, or to worry. When preocupar is used reflexively, it means to be worried or simply to worry, even though it literally means to worry oneself. For example, me preocupo means I'm worried, even though it literally seems to mean I worry myself. they aren't worried would be no se preocupan. This reflexive version of preocupar can also mean that someone concerns himself or herself with something. And that means that they're concerned with taking care of it or making sure of something. This is typically followed by de. For example, he always takes care of that would be siempre se preocupa de eso. One more note regarding preocupar. Very often, a verb's participle can be used as an adjective. So the participle of preocupar is preocupado. So if you say me ha preocupado, that means it has worried me, but estoy preocupado is using preocupado as an adjective, and it means I'm worried. So if you're talking about a group of women and you say they are worried, you would say están preocupadas. Let's move along. We have just one more verb neighborhood in the woods. After we pass by pasar, we find a bridge over a stream, which is just like the reflexive stream from the countryside. Here we find 3 verb shops, casar and quedar on the left, and sentar on the right. These shops are actually floating in the stream on either side of the bridge. Casar is the floating justice of the peace office where couples can get married. The Tsar officiates these weddings if he happens to decide to leave his pasar office. The word casar means to marry, but note that this word is almost always reflexive, which is why it's here. To say he's getting married, you would say se casa. I'm getting married is me caso. Quedar is another business floating on the same boat. Here, dar sells some very special glowing darts. If you throw these darts into the water, they stay exactly where you threw them, floating on the surface of the water and never moving. Quedar means to remain. This verb actually means various things, but the most common use is as a reflexive verb that means to stay. For example, he's staying here is se queda aquí. I'm staying at home is me quedo en casa. Sentar, on the other side of the bridge, is a foot therapy business. The business just looks like a bunch of floating seats. The theory is that once you're seated, the fish in the stream will nibble at your feet therapeutically. Sentar means to seat. The most common use is as a reflexive verb. Sentarme is to seat myself, and sentarse is to seat herself. Nobody in Yol says sit down. They always say seat yourself or siéntate. Sentar changes in the same way that pensar changes. Instead of siento, it's siento. Let's look at some simple examples of each one. I'll seat myself and wait. That would be me siento y espero. I'll stay and wait would be me quedo y espero. And then I'm getting married in some country far away. That would be me caso en algún país muy lejos. To get married is casarse, or casar but reflexive. But to get married to someone, as we say in English, is actually casarse con alguien. So we use to get married with someone rather than to get married to someone. For example, his plan was to get married to the king's daughter. That would actually be su plan era casarse con la hija del rey. There's also a nuance about quedar that you should know. So idiomatically, quedarse sometimes, instead of meaning staying, can mean to end up in a situation. You can tell from context which is the case. So, for example, I ended up without money could be me quedé sin dinero. If you read or heard that phrase, you might think, why are they saying I stayed without money? And why isn't an event me quedé sin dinero? But if you remember that it has this alternate meaning, you can interpret it the other way. It's not I stayed without money, but as an event, I ended up without money. That's it for our AR verbs, the ones in the woods. Make sure you've solidified all of these before you go on. Walk through the woods, one neighborhood at a time in your imagination. What shops are on the left and what shops are on the right?